What if the brushes in a car wash are alive? My name is Alex. I'm 22. I work as a technician in a data center, and my shifts often end long after midnight. That evening, I decided to take a shortcut through an old forest road to get home faster. When I drove back onto the asphalt, my old black sedan was covered in a layer of strange gray slime and pine needles, as if the car had been inside the jaws of some beast. I won't name the exact intersection or the name of the chain, because the owner still denies that the surveillance cameras that evening simply shut down due to a power surge. On the outskirts of the suburb, I saw an old 24-hour car wash. A lonely neon sign reading Auto Wash flickered with a pale blue light, pulling rusty metal structures out of the darkness. There were no other cars around, only the empty highway and the dense forest. The price for a full wash cycle was only $5, ridiculously cheap. I slid the bill into the terminal, and the entrance gate rattled as it lifted, opening the gaping mouth of an empty concrete tunnel. I slowly drove inside, trying to align my wheels with the metal track. Inside, it smelled damp and full of old cleaning chemicals. As soon as my rear wheels crossed the threshold, the massive steel doors behind me slammed shut with a sound like a prison cell locking. The lights in the tunnel went out, leaving only the faint red glow of sensor lights. Ahead of me, the first rows of brushes slowly began to rotate. They looked strange. Their bristles weren't bright but dirty gray, long and tangled, like old hair hanging from the ceiling. Suddenly, the first wave of foam splashed onto the windshield. It wasn't white, but grayish with rainbow streaks that looked like an oil slick. When the foam completely blocked my view, I heard the first strange sound. It wasn't the usual humming of pumps. It was the rapid, tiny tapping of hundreds of fingers running across the roof of my car, as if a giant centipede had landed on top and was now searching for a crack to crawl inside. I froze, gripping the steering wheel. The rumble of the brushes grew louder and louder, but through it I clearly heard a quiet metallic whisper coming from behind the door pillars. The brushes slammed into the sides of the car with insane force. The car started rocking so violently that I felt the wheels almost jump out of the metal track. Suddenly, the entire mechanism stopped abruptly. A deafening silence fell, broken only by the slow dripping of heavy gray foam down the glass. I glanced into the rearview mirror, trying to see anything through the foam. One of the vertical brushes, standing about a meter from the rear bumper, slowly began to tilt. It detached from its metal mount with a wet sound, like flesh being torn from bone. The tangled mass of dirty fibers fell onto the concrete floor and began to transform. From beneath the gray bristles, long semi-transparent limbs emerged, resembling spider legs but made of twisted wet fibers. The creature slowly crawled across my rear window, leaving scratches across the glass behind it. I wanted to turn on the windshield wipers, but the car's electronics began acting on their own. The headlights flickered, and the radio produced nothing but static, which gradually formed rhythmic sounds of metal scraping against metal. It was imitating the sound of my engine failing, so perfectly that for a moment I believed the motor was actually falling apart. At that moment, a horrible smell flowed into the cabin through the ventilation. It was the smell of stagnant swamp water, rotten fish, and rust. My eyes started watering, and my lungs felt as if they were filling with damp cotton. I looked at the windshield. Beneath the layer of dark foam, I saw something that made my blood freeze. A huge hand, twice the size of mine, pressed against the glass from the outside. The fingers were unbelievably long, and the skin, if it was skin, looked like a weaving of thousands of thin gray threads. Slowly, centimeter by centimeter, the hand began pressing harder on the glass. I heard it start to emit a thin sound, approaching the critical point that would end with an explosion of shards straight into my face. When the glass under the pressure of the giant hand began to show a faint web of cracks, I remembered a story from an old mechanic in my garage cooperative. He once said that this car wash had been built on the site of a drained black swamp. During construction, one of the workers disappeared without a trace in the water filtration tank. He was never found, but about a year later rumors began to spread about the Brush Whisperer. It was an entity born from swamp magic and human misfortune, absorbed into the mechanisms of the car wash. It became part of the brushes and filters, feeding on those who came here alone. It didn't just wash cars. It scrubbed the life off everything living, turning it into part of its endless mass of threads. The creature on the roof began making a sound like quiet laughter, imitating the creak of the old springs in my seat. It knew I was afraid. It knew I was trapped. The roof of the car slowly began bending inward under the weight of that many-armed tangle. I realized the Whisperer didn't just want to kill me. It wanted to drag me into the narrow drainage system beneath the floor, tearing my body apart into the same thin fibers that made up its own form. I grabbed the gear lever. The engine roared, but the car didn't move. The conveyor belt held the wheels in a dead grip. The hand on the windshield tightened into a fist, preparing for the final strike that would shatter the laminated glass. Suddenly, I saw the exit gate directly in front of the hood. It was closed, but I knew it was my only way out. I shifted the gear into drive and closed my eyes, preparing for the collision. The monster's fist came down on the glass, and it exploded into a million diamond-like fragments that showered the interior. I felt wet bristles touch my face, trying to crawl into my mouth and nose. I slammed the gas pedal all the way to the floor. The car jerked violently, ripping itself free from the metal clamps of the conveyor. A horrifying crash rang out. I rammed straight through the exit gate. The metal of the gate burst apart like paper, but the sound wasn't metallic. It was a wet crunch, as if I had driven through a giant rib cage. I shot out onto the night highway without stopping for even a second. I drove at 140 kilometers per hour until the lights of gas stations and street lamps finally appeared around me. Only under the bright lights in the center of the city did I stop and step out of the car. The windshield was gone. The interior was covered with foam and glass, but I was alive. Silence hung around me, and only the wind whistled through the empty window frame. I fell asleep in the car near dawn, exhausted from adrenaline. The next morning, I woke up from the blinding sun. When I examined the car, I almost collapsed. It was perfectly clean, too clean. Not a single stain, not a speck of dust. But the paint on the roof and hood had been stripped down to bare metal, as if it had been treated with industrial acid. I walked to the driver's door and noticed a clump of long gray fibers wedged in the narrow gap between the door and the body of the car. When I reached out to remove it, The fibers suddenly twitched rhythmically, like a living nerve. They began slowly twisting deeper into the interior of my car, trying to find their way to the wiring. I realized that the brush whisperer hadn't let me go. It had simply changed location. Now, when I drive through the city, I sometimes hear a quiet whisper from the speakers of my car. It's the sound of metal scraping against metal, patiently waiting until I drive into some dark alley again so it can finish its work. If you came to the last screening and noticed a person in the front row who isn't moving, don't wait for the credits. Dan walked into theater number 13, where the projector began showing his own death live. The extra actor isn't playing a role. He's waiting for you to blink so he can take a step closer. Watch this story if you are sure that your pupils have not yet turned silver.